Hello everyone and welcome to our presentation. I hope everyone to be safe and sound, and it's my pleasure to participate in 8th National Conference on Second Language Studies. I would like to express my deepest appreciation to the board of the conference for providing us with such an opportunity to present our study. My name is Mojgan Khaki. Together with Dr. Azizeh Chalak, we are very honored to be here talking about the research titled Cultural Resources Listening Performance of Intermediate Iranian EFL Learners and Their Level of Emotional Intelligence. Let's start. Some scholars claim that emotional intelligence, or the emotional quotient, is a new model of human behavior that attracted attention. Actually, in Goleman's book, Emotional Intelligence, Goleman believed that emotional intelligence includes skills such as the ability to motivate, endure, control impulses, and delay satisfaction in the face of frustration. He also continues to emphasize and hope for the ability to regulate mood, prevent stress, and think in reverse. The nature and identity of the language seems to vary from country to country in the world. Many factors play a decisive role, but one of the most important ones is culture. Culture refers to the way people in each community see the world around themselves, their lifestyle, their way of thinking, and their reaction to the world and others. Culture also points to the lifestyle of the target community, and the language teachers need to be aware of culture-based learning. And according to some anthropologists, culture is a pattern of thought and behavior that people in social groups learn, create, and share. Psychologists and linguists have put a lot of effort into investigating how emotional intelligence affects English skills and strategies. Listening is a major challenge for many EFL learners. The difficulty of segmenting audio streams and their limited short-term memory capacity are considered as common weaknesses among language learners. EFL learners usually live in countries with different cultural norms. To understand part of the listening excerpt, the learner must quickly process the continuous stream of sound and divide it into smaller and even easier to understand sections. Lack of knowledge of the target culture creates confusion among language learners. It is very clear that there are many differences between English-speaking countries and Iranian culture, and this distinction causes many problems for EFL learners. Imagine Iranian EFL learners want to explain how learners ask each other to do something. For example, the speech of act requests, or thank each other, the speech act of thanking. Such situations may result in misunderstandings and difficulties in conversational comprehension because they are not practically aware of the norms of the target language and culture. So the more familiar the learner is with the target culture, the better the understanding. And the materials used for listening lessons should contain elements of local culture, and the language is inseparable from culture. Namazianust, Sabzavare and Hashemi Fardnia 2018 investigated the impact of the use of cultural materials on the listening comprehension of male and female EFL learners in Iran. Actually, participants included 96 advanced intermediate EFL learners. The results show that participants achieved different levels of performance in post-tests and that culture-oriented linguistic materials improved the listening comprehension of Iranian EFL learners. In addition, the results show that after the test, male learners were superior to female learners. In a related study, Mahmoudi 2017 investigated the relationship between listener cultural schema and listener activation and performance in understanding EFL listening. The respondents to this study were two groups of 37 Muslim Iranian learners. At this point, two audio files were presented. One is about the mosque and the other is about the cathedral. The null hypothesis of this study was whether listening to a culturally unknown topic, cathedral, could activate the schema of a culturally familiar topic, mosque. For low-level learners, the theory of research was accepted. It states that new content cannot activate culturally recognizable schemas of lower-level learners, whether theoretically comparable or not. Yazidi, Says, and Alton 2011 investigated the potential impact of emotional intelligence and self-efficacy beliefs on high school performance. After analyzing data obtained through emotional intelligence and self-efficacy questionnaires, these researchers found that gender, age, and self-efficacy were the main predictors of student performance at school. OT 2006 examined the results of oral text for listening by 40 ESL students enrolled in a 9-week advanced ESL listening course at a private university in the United States. The results of this study show that the use of oral texts in advanced ESL listening courses motivates learners to look for opportunities to hear authentic languages outside the classroom. Students also became more aware of the cognitive, metacognitive, and socio-emotional learning strategies that they most often use when working with real texts orally, as well as their strengths and weaknesses as listeners and learners. Over time, students became better able to understand the characteristics of real English, such as contractions, cuts, and dropouts, and their attitudes toward learning English improved. پیشقدم 2009 investigated the relationship between emotional intelligence and foreign language learning. The results show that the overall EQ and its subscales were poor predictors of second language learning, while multiple subscales were reading, GPA, writing, and speaking. In a study of L1 culture in the EFL and foreign classrooms, Segers 2008 concluded that it seems that learners' ability to bring their culture into the TESOL classroom depends on a variety of factors. In particular, the time spent at home and abroad through other encounters with English-speaking people at home and abroad, and with English-speaking culture, including television shows. Also, gender and age seem to have a strong influence. This study seeks to measure the relationship between Iranian intermediate EFL learners' emotional intelligence and their listening performance when culture-bound materials are used. Because of the rather novelty of the type of the study at hand, it can be claimed that not many studies to date have conducted a comparative study of the possible impact of gender as the moderator variable in mastering listening with respect to emotional intelligence, especially in Iran. There is only a limited amount of work available on emotional intelligence and gender-related factors in other countries. Research questions: does using culture-bound materials have any significant impact on listening performance of Iranian intermediate EFL learners considering their level of emotional intelligence? And the second research question is there any significant relationship between the gender of EFL learners and their listening achievement in light of their level of emotional intelligence when culture-bound materials are used in listening classes? The present study employed a quasi-experimental design, and it was carried out in a language institute in Isfahan, Iran, during the first term of the educational year of 2019 to 2020. The independent variable was the participants' listening comprehension, and the dependent variables were cultural materials as well as the participants' level of emotional intelligence. The participants in this study included 50 Iranian male and female intermediate level EFL learners, age 14 to 18, 24 men and 26 women. They were studying English at a language school in Isfahan and were selected through questionnaires, the Oxford Quick Assessment Test, and listening tests. Participants were divided into two groups when using cultural materials to see if emotional intelligence was significantly associated with EFL learners' listening comprehension. This process was randomly performed so that the numbers of male and female learners in both groups were approximately the same, 24 male and 26 female learners. The names of the groups were Culture-Bound Group A and Culture-Bound Group B. Instruments. Two types of instruments were used in this study. One of them is Trait Emotional Intelligence Questionnaire. It is a simplified version of Trait Emotional Intelligence Questionnaires adult abbreviation. In terms of wording and syntactic complexity, the ASF consists of 30 short statements, 2 for each of the 15 facets of the characteristics emotional intelligence developed to measure the global characteristic emotional intelligence. The factor scores can also be derived from Trait Emotional Intelligence Questionnaire ASF, but they tend to be slightly less reliable, and the internal consistency of global scores usually exceeds 0.80. This form has been successfully used by children over the age of 11. And the second material was listening comprehension pre-test and post-test. A general listening comprehension test, the listening section of a TOEFL, was used as the pretest. The goal of using a listening comprehension test was to check if the participants are homogeneous in terms of their listening ability. After the treatment, a listening comprehension test was devised based on what was taught to the learners during the treatment, and this test was used as the post-test. The listening materials, which contain culturally bound materials, were used in class. These materials included the conversations in different places, such as restaurants, movies, classes, advertisements, idioms, and special expressions, and so on. Data collection procedure. The required data was collected through listening tests and questionnaires. Actually, the required data was collected from a comparative analysis of the scores of the participants in the two groups. The purpose of this study was to investigate the effect of using cultural materials on listening ability of Iranian intermediate EFL learners at different levels of emotional intelligence. To find the answer to this question from English learners studying English at Isfahan's language school, 50 people, male and female students, were selected based on their Oxford placement test grades. In fact, learners with scores between 37 and 49 were classified as intermediate. A listening comprehension test, a listening part of the TOEFL paper-based test, was conducted to ensure that these participants had the same level of listening. And participants were then asked to fill out an emotional intelligence questionnaire. And participants' results from emotional intelligence questionnaires were analyzed and cutoff scores were defined. The total score for this survey was 210, so I set 105 as the cutoff score. As a result, participants were divided into two groups, high and low, with some students earning more than 105 points in one group and 105 points in the other group. Participants had different levels of emotional intelligence, but all were taught cultural materials in the classroom. To answer the research questions, all participants were exposed to cultural materials as a treatment for listening lessons. The experiment then began and participants from both groups took listening classes. During the study, students in the experimental group were instructed and informed about American idioms, superstitions, vacation habits, and daily behavior. And after 10 sessions, each 75 minutes, participants sat down on another listening test that acted as a follow-up test. A second study examining the effect of gender on Iranian EFL learners' listening comprehension with respect to emotional intelligence. To answer the second question was necessary to distinguish between male and female learners, co-educated classes. Results. In order to find the answer to the first research question, which concerned the possible effects of using culture-bound materials on listening comprehension of EFL learners as far as their level of emotional intelligence is concerned, a listening pretest was administered on the participants of the two groups. Here the results are analyzed, and the table 1 presents the descriptive statistics of the listening pretest of CBGA and CBGB. CBGA stands for Culture Bound Group A and CBGB stands for Culture Bound Group B. As the results show, the average CBGA or group with high emotional intelligence is 54 and the average CBGB in the group with low emotional intelligence was low at 50.84. This shows a mean difference of 3.16, which doesn't seem to matter. Table 2 shows the results of the independent sample test of the scores of the listening pre-test. Based on the results, the significance level was 0.144, which is higher than the identified significance level. It was concluded that there was no significant difference in CBGA and CBGB performance at the start of the study. To investigate the relationship between emotional intelligence and the hearing ability of EFL learners, several culture-related materials were selected. As explained in other sections, and participants in both groups were exposed to these materials. The reason for receiving a treatment in both groups was that the level of emotional intelligence was established at the beginning of the study. After the treatment was conducted, the participants sat for a listening post-test. Table 4 shows the results of the independent sample test of the scores of the listening post-test. and the significance level is lower than the identified significance level. This represents the fact that the difference between CBGA and CBGB was statistically significant. This led to the rejection of the first null hypothesis of the study. In other words, learners who prefer a higher level of emotional intelligence will benefit more if cultural material is used in listening lessons. Possess EFL learner results to test the potential association between EFL learner gender and auditory performance in terms of the level of emotional intelligence when using cultural material in listening lessons, gender of participation. Table 5 shows the descriptive statistics of the performance of male and females in listening post-test. According to the statistics, as it's shown in Table 5, the average score for men with CBGA was 65.33, with women with CBGA with an average score of 60.61. Male subgroups with CBGB 60.33 and CBGB 51.92. The first subgroup seems to outperform all other subgroups, and there are differences in the performance of the four subgroups. However, it is not yet clear whether this difference is statistically significant. And to make this claim more objective, we performed a one-way analysis of variance ANOVA. Table 7, as you can see, there are four subgroups in Table 7. Subgroup 1 is a male learner of CBGA, subgroup 2 is a female student of CBGA, subgroup 3 is a male of CBGB, and subgroup 4 is a female of CBGB. In fact, Table 7 compares the performance of male and female participants in the listening post-test. Multiple comparisons are shown here. There are some asterisks next to some values in the column titled mean differences. As the captions in the table indicates, the asterisk indicates that the value is important. The first significant difference is between subgroup 1 and 4. And the second important difference is between subgroup 2, CBGA women, and subgroup 4, CBGB women. The significance level is 0.005, which is less than 0.05. CBGB male subgroup 3 was significantly different from CBGB female subgroup 4. And from the results, it can be understood that the second null hypothesis of the study is rejected. To put it in other words, we have to reject the null hypothesis, expressing that gender has no meaningful effect on listening achievement in light of their level of emotional intelligence when culture-bound materials are used in listening classes. The findings of this study can lead language teachers to include such materials as listening pieces about cultural entities to improve the listening ability of language learners. As the current study showed that there is a positive relationship between Iranian EFL learners' emotional intelligence and the performance in listening tests when culture-bound materials are used in language classes. Therefore, the results of this study can brighten the path for both language teachers and learners. The results of the study can also shed light on university language professors by demonstrating one of the techniques used in listening classes, the role of improving emotional intelligence. So, Iranian professors will teach listening comprehension materials and learn to improve listening comprehension of major English students and gender dichotomy just as this studies between male and female students. Therefore, the survey's results help teachers determine the types of materials available to learners in listening lessons. This study provides hands-on teachers with practical suggestions on how to help listeners become more aware of use of listening strategies. The results can encourage language teachers to teach listening comprehension and take a more systematic approach to planning programs in the classroom. Other studies can narrow down this attention and examine the relationship between emotional intelligence and other language skills such as speaking, reading, and writing, as well as language sub-skills such as vocabulary and grammar. In this study, the quasi-experimental design method was used. Other types of research may be recommended to investigate the role of emotional intelligence in literacy. And different age groups with different educational backgrounds also can participate in this study to see if they get the same results. I sincerely appreciate your attention to our presentation. If you would like more information or have any questions, please feel free to contact us on our email addresses. Thank you very much.